Some pretty shocking but very exciting IndyCar news broke yesterday as it was revealed that seven-time NASCAR Cup Series champion Jimmie Johnson will be testing for Chip Ganassi Racing on the Indianapolis Motor Speedway road course in one of Ganassi's Indy cars just after the NASCAR IndyCar doubleheader at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway on July the 8th. Which of course then starts sparking your imagination as to when and where will Jimmie Johnson run his first IndyCar race. His intentions have been pretty well stated at this point. Will it happen this year? We're going to talk about a few possibilities of where it may occur if it does. Originally, of course, Jimmie was going to test and presumably race with the McLaren team and even had a test scheduled after a seat fit for Barber Motorsports Park. However, the global pandemic shutdown meant that that test was put on the back burner. So we have a ton of stuff to talk about here because this is something that I did not expect to happen this year. I thought all of this stuff with Jimmie Johnson, for example, I thought this was going to be off the table. I thought with both the condensed NASCAR and IndyCar schedules and the shutdown and the fact that I didn't think teams and sponsors were going to have extra money to do this sort of thing, I was shocked yesterday to find out that not only Jimmie Johnson was going to get his IndyCar test, but that it was going to happen with Chip Ganassi Racing. And there's a couple of reasons I will talk about there because there are some conflicts here, which some people have pointed out, but maybe there's some here that I'm going to talk about in this video that haven't been pointed out before. So obviously the first thing, and probably the reason that he's testing with Ganassi, or at least one of the biggest reasons why he's testing with Ganassi, is the fact that because of the shutdown across the world, McLaren really has lost a lot of money as a company, and they've actually had to receive some bailouts from some of their investors and some of their sponsors to be able to keep going. So it makes a lot of sense that they would not have the extra money this year to just go say, hey, let's go test or do an extra test that we didn't have planned at Indianapolis with Jimmie Johnson. And we'd also known, I think it was motorsport.com that reported this, that there was originally plans to run essentially a third full-time McLaren car throughout the year where different drivers would swap in. So you'd get Alonso one week, you'd get Jenson Button another week, you get Jimmie Johnson, and it would be those three drivers, maybe a few more, that would kind of swap in between that car. That, of course, those plans are off the table right now. That I would imagine they got pushed back to 2021, if not further back, depending on McLaren's financial stability. But Ganassi, that's where things get really interesting because there's a couple of things that I can kind of see how and why this all came together. And there are still conflicts there that I think at least need to be pointed out. I think a lot of people made the obvious one, which is Ganassi is powered by Honda. And of course, Jimmie Johnson is one of Chevy's golden boys over on the NASCAR side of things. So that's part of the reason why it made so much sense that he would be going to McLaren. McLaren is a Chevrolet-powered team. Running a Honda, that's a little bit different. Now, we know that Chevy and Honda's relationship isn't nearly as adversarial as, say, Ford and Chevy or Honda and Toyota. So I'm sure this was a little bit easier to kind of smooth things over to do. And, of course, Ganassi also runs Chevys and NASCAR. So maybe there was, I'm sure there was all sorts of corporate backroom dealings to get this done. But here's the other thing, too, is Jimmie is sponsored by Ally Bank. You go over to the IndyCar side, and they're sponsored, the Ganassi IndyCar team is sponsored by PNC Bank, direct competitors. So even though I put Jimmie in a PNC car in the thumbnail, I think it's way more likely that he's going to be testing the NTT car, the NTT data car that Felix Rosenqvist usually drives. And that that line of thinking brought me around to this. Who's the title sponsor of the IndyCar series? NTT. If indeed Jimmie's in the NTT data car, it really started spinning the noggin up a little bit that, wait a second, how much of this here is Roger Penske doing some negotiating? And let me just say this real quick. Let's kind of put some pieces together. Let's connect some dots because I know Reddit loves when I do that. Roger Penske saw that the opportunity that was going to happen with Jimmie Johnson, get some exposure, have him test with McLaren, possibly race later in the year, that looked like that was falling apart due to financial reasons. Well, what do? Well, you need some money. Well, where do you get some money? Well, you've got your title sponsor there. You pitch to your title sponsor, NTT, and say, hey, can you help us pay to get Jimmie Johnson in this car at Indianapolis? You know, you have your team, Chip Ganassi Racing. Obviously, it'd be great for the series. We'd love if you do it. So let's say that happened. Jimmie, then, of course, also the thing to consider, you might say, well, if that's the case, why isn't Penske doing this himself? Well, Penske's team is based in North Carolina. To make sure that you don't ruffle any COVID feathers, you probably don't want to keep the North Carolina team in Indianapolis longer than they're supposed to be. So that's why Indianapolis-based team, Chip Ganassi Racing, of course, McLaren's IndyCar operation is also based in Indianapolis. So obviously they would have been the best first option, but again, financial difficulties. Chip Ganassi, very clearly the next best option. They've got the title sponsor there. You'll get them some free exposure. You'll get the series a ton of exposure through this. And there's the potential that, well, not the potential, Jimmie Johnson is going to get the best coaching possible. He's going to have Scott Dixon there. He's going to have Mike Hull there. He's going to have Chip Ganassi there. These are guys who know how to win in IndyCar racing, and they know how to, be at the front. Jimmie's going to be driving literally the best equipment he possibly could get that's not obviously associated directly with Team Penske. So from this perspective, I think it's going to be a great learning experience for Jimmie Johnson. I think and remember what happened when he ride swapped with Fernando Alonso. He was up to speed right off the bat. So I don't think pace is going to be a problem with Jimmie. And then you start thinking, okay, if this test goes well, there's no unforeseen circumstances, does Jimmie race this year? And I think you have to look at potential conflicts on the Cup side of things. And I've looked at the IndyCar schedule, and these are the events that are probably most likely, if Jimmie Johnson is going to do a race this year, these are the ones he would do. There's no conflict at the Road America Race 1 on July 11th. Now, he wouldn't be able to do Race 2, but theoretically, he could be in Elkhart Lake, Wisconsin, and then fly over to the NASCAR race, I think, in Kentucky for the next day. So that's a possibility. He could also do Iowa Race 1, July 17th. That doesn't have a conflict with a NASCAR race. And you might say, well, Jimmie Johnson doesn't want to do ovals, but if you think way back pre-COVID, I think Jenna Fryer reported, I think it was her, that Jimmie was not adverse to doing short ovals now. It was just the high-speed ovals at Texas and Indianapolis that he didn't want to do. So he theoretically could do Iowa. Keeping on that thought point, he could do Gateway on August 30th. That's a Sunday, I think it's a Sunday night race. It's the race after the Indianapolis 500. I think there's a Saturday race for NASCAR before then. So that's one. I think that would be a big, well, I almost said that will be a big crowd. We don't know that. Never mind. Forget what I said about crowd, but Gateway would be a good one for Jimmie to do. Portland on September 13th doesn't have a NASCAR conflict. I don't know if Jimmie would want to fly out to the West Coast, but you never know. We also don't know if the races on the West Coast are even happening at this point. Case in point, Laguna Seca race number 2. That's another race that doesn't have a conflict, but once you start talking about September, you're starting to talk about the NASCAR playoffs, and you're starting to wonder whether or not Jimmie Johnson will actually be able to participate in those sort of races. The final one, and this may be the race that is the most likely, the final non-NASCAR conflict IndyCar race of the year is the Harvest Grand Prix at the Indianapolis Road Course on October 3rd. I would think that that one's the most likely. Jimmie will have already tested there. Roger Penske will want some sort of a hook to get people invested in and interested in that race. Jimmie Johnson running it, Harvest Grand Prix, October 3rd. I think that would be the one. If he's running this race this year, that would be it. But hey, we still have another race in Indianapolis to talk about. It's the big one on the 2.5-mile oval, and we've actually got some Fernando Alonso news. So Fernando Alonso unveiled his livery for the Indy 500. Of course, he's sponsored by Ruoff Home Mortgage, which is interesting and kind of ironic because the sponsor that won his first and only Indianapolis 500 start to date was Ruhoff Home Mortgage. Are the stars aligning? I don't know. It's going to depend on the shade of orange they use for those mirrors on that car. And I guess at some point we're going to have to change the Fernando Alonso shirt to teal, but as of right now, you can get it, the orange Fernando Alonso shirt for the month of August over at race92.com. Use code DAVID10 at checkout to save 10%. But I want to talk about the Indy 500 entry list because it's something that we haven't talked about a lot recently because, quite honestly, we haven't really even known if the race is going to happen. But I looked over it. We had some news earlier this week that was broken by Racer.com that the Top Gun racing team for R.C. Anderson wasn't going to happen. So then you start thinking, okay, how many cars theoretically are there that could enter this year's Indianapolis 500? I've got 30 confirmations right now. I think I'm pretty solid at 30. I will name those really quick because there's not really a whole lot of new information there. You can go back and look at previous videos if you want a more in-depth analysis of these drivers, but pretty much it's old information at this point. I'll go numerically in the order. Number 1, Newgarden. Number 3, Elio Castroneves. Number 4, Kimball. 5, Award. 7, Askew. 8, Erickson. 9, Dixon. 10, Rosenquist. 12, Power. 14, Kanaan. 15, Ray Hall, 18, Santino Ferrucci, 20, Ed Carpenter, 21, Rinus VeeKay, 22, Simon Pagenaud, 24, Sage Karam, 26, Zach Veach, 27, Alexander Rossi, 28, Ryan Hunter-Reay, 29, James Hinchcliffe, number 30, Sato, 41, Kellett, 45, Piggott, 47, Daly, 55, Palou, 59, Chilton, 60, Harvey, 66, Alonso, 88, Herta, and 98, Andretti. So those are the 30 that are solid, confirmed, and you can put them in the bag. They're going to be at the Indianapolis 500 if it happens this year. I have 5 pretty solid unconfirmed entries. So theoretically, everything goes to plan. We get an entry of 35 cars, which I think, given the circumstances, that is going to be a fantastic number. Those cars are the currently unconfirmed second Carlin Racing car. That car did not show up at Texas. I think they're planning on being at the Indy GP. I haven't seen them confirm a driver yet, so I guess we'll just have to wait for that. We don't know who could be on the ovals right now, but that car would be number 31. I think there's some talk about possibly a third Carlin car. I at this point, I would very much doubt that. I'd love it for it to happen and there'd be 36 cars, but I don't think so. J.R. Hildebrand at Ryan Ryan Racing has not yet been confirmed. They've talked about it quite a bit, but we haven't seen everything signed, sealed, and delivered yet, so I'm not confident to confirm it yet. Another one that I'm not 100% confident to confirm yet, but I think is highly likely as an entry, is James Davison and the Bird Racing Team. Now, we don't know who they'll partner with 100%. I would assume it will be Dale Coyne once again, but again, we don't know that. They clearly have the money to race. They were in the NASCAR race at Pocono just last week, so I don't think that's going to be an issue per se for the Bird family racing team. I think it's just going to be finding a partner team and being able to get James Davison ready to go and up to speed for the 500. Juncos Racing. We haven't heard much from Juncos Racing, especially kind of post-pandemic. Originally, I think they were absolutely planning on coming with Kyle Kaiser. Now you start asking the questions. Do they have the money to run Kaiser? Is there a pay driver somewhere that may be able to get them to the grid? Maybe you start thinking of a Pippa Mann or if Stephen Wilson could find money. Which of those drivers maybe could get that team to the grid? I would guess they're probably not super overflowing with sponsors. So my guess is if Juncos happens, they have a pay driver. And the final one is Dragon Speed. Now, Dragon Speed essentially decided to halt all their other plans to go to the rest of the races this year. They were at St. Pete with Ben Hanley as the driver, but of course St. Pete didn't happen. They've diverted all of their resources to running just the Indianapolis 500, so I think on this list they're one of the more likely candidates to actually show up, but it's one of those things that depends on who is the driver. The smart money would probably be on Ben Hanley at this point. Hanley has experience with the team with a shorter month of May. I think it's a day or two, or short month of August. I think there's a day or two subtracted from the practice there. I think you might want to go with a driver who has setup experience with your particular car, your particular setup, your particular chassis. My guess would be on Ben Hanley right now, unless they have an Oriol Servia or somebody that they can bring into the team that might be maybe a little bit more solid of a qualifier. But then again, Ben Hanley was very solid in qualifying this year. But I think Dragon Speed, James Davison, and J.R. Hildebrand, for sure, that would complete your 33. Then you start thinking, okay, is there another... Does Carlin and Junko show up? Then you get 35, maybe 34. I would say 50-50 on a bump day. Of course, I'd say 50-50 on the race happening. So who knows at this point? But there's at least stuff to talk about. And that is a vast, vast improvement over what has happened recently. So we got a huge weekend coming up on this channel. Tons and tons of live streams. You guys were so into the post-race streams at Texas, and of course there are now 3 races. We're not going to do post-race streams for every NASCAR session, but we will be doing post-race streams for the NASCAR races, if that makes sense. But after every IndyCar session, which I think is 1 practice, 1 qualifying, and then the race, definitely doing a stream for those. Definitely doing a stream after the Xfinity race, and then a stream after the Brickyard 400. Might do one before the Brickyard 400 too. I think it's a late start, so that would be something that we might be able to do. Stay tuned for the schedule. I'm hoping to have that out tomorrow, and I can't wait to see all of you guys there. Thank you guys so much for watching. Also, hope to have some special guests. I'm going to be working on that too. Thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe if you enjoyed this content. Got a lot more coming. July is going to be when things really start getting back into the swing of things, and I couldn't be more excited for that. So we will see you in the next video.